In this video, we will be taking a look at how to read food labels. Food labels are helpful for us when it comes to making informed decisions when it comes to what we eat. Food labels will also be helpful for you when it comes to the dietary analysis assignments that you will be completing in this course. Before we jump into what we are looking at when it comes to food labels, I wanted to briefly talk about some new things that you will see on your food labels as of 2020. In 2018, there was legislation that was passed in order to change some things as far as food labels are concerned. So a few of those elements include serving size. Serving size is more prominent now on the food label. Before it was small print and it was hard to see on the food label. Now it stands out a little bit more on our food labels. Additionally, serving sizes are now more realistic, and what I mean by that is they better reflect what the average American eats. So for instance, when it came to ice cream, it listed 1/2 cup as the serving size prior to new food label laws. However, with newer food label laws, now we'll see serving sizes that are around 2/3 cups because it was determined that Americans are more likely to consume 2/3 cups of ice cream compared to 1/2 cup. Next, we have calories. Just like serving size, calories are now much more prominent on the food label. That is going to be the biggest part that you see on the food label now. And it's important because we do need to keep track of our calories, especially if we are trying to watch how much we're consuming. Next is fats. Beforehand on the food labels, there was a section that said calories from fat. We'll take a look at an older food label in a second. They determined, though, that this really wasn't necessary, and really what we should be focusing more on is the type of fat that is within the food, because ultimately the type of fat is going to determine whether or not it's beneficial or not to our health, which is something that we will talk about more later in this course. Then we have sugar. Added sugars now must be listed on food labels. Before it only had total sugars, or at least manufacturers were only required to include total sugars, but now they need to also include added sugars. And the added sugars are based on a recommendation of no more than 50 grams of sugar or 12.5 teaspoons of sugar per day. And then finally, nutrients. Some of the nutrients listed have changed on our food labels. So before, calcium and iron were required on food labels, and so is vitamin A and vitamin C. Now, it was determined that vitamin A and vitamin C really are not problems anymore when it comes to deficiencies in the United States. However, potassium and vitamin D, those are two that Americans are struggling with meeting daily requirements. In light of that, we have now included those two and gotten rid of vitamin A and vitamin C off of our food labels. So those are the two nutrients that have changed on the food label as well. I wanted to make a quick note about our textbook. Somewhere in one of the first few chapters, it mentions that nutrition labels do not need to distinguish between added and naturally occurring sugars. As I just stated, though, as of January 1st, 2020, all food labels are now required to differentiate between the types of sugars. So you can just disregard this comment in the book. Obviously, it was written before this current policy was enacted. Now we're going to take a look at some things that are important to note on food labels. Keep in mind, this one that we're looking at is based on an older food label, but in a minute I will show newer food labels. Now, first we're going to want to look at servings. So we have our serving size and we have our servings per container. Within the book, there are helpful measures in order to determine how much something might have using either your hand or common household items. So for instance, I believe that 1 tablespoon is measured by your thumb. So if you look at your thumb, you can say, okay, that's about 1 tablespoon of, let's say, butter. Or we can say a fist is about half a cup, etc. You get the point. This is to make it easier when it comes to determining how much quantity there is for foods instead of taking out our measuring cups and spoons every time we're wanting to eat something, because after a while, that does become pretty inconvenient. It's also important to note the servings per container, just because some products where you might think it would have 1 serving, it differentiates the servings into 2 different servings. So for instance, this is common when it comes to beverages and also soups. So if you take a look at those food labels, something that, such as maybe a soda or a can of soup, that you're probably going to have all of it at once, well, according to what I just said a little while ago, that's not really realistic when it comes to what the average person eats. So that's just something to keep in mind, is to know, well, how many servings does this actually have? In the case of the macaroni and cheese, let's just assume that you're going to eat everything that's in the package. So if that's the case, then that really means that you need to double all these numbers. So for instance, the calories aren't going to be 250, it's going to be 500 because you're having both servings. So just keep that in mind. Speaking of calories, next we're going to look at the calories. Now, something that is important to note is that with all food labels, these are going to be based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Now, a 2,000 calorie diet might not be appropriate for you. For some of you, you might need fewer calorie needs. For some of you, let's say that you're athletes, you're probably going to need more than 2,000 calories. So just keep that in mind when looking at these daily value percentages. These might not accurately reflect what you require. That's why tools like Spark People are extremely helpful, because it helps to determine what you personally need when it comes to things such as vitamin A, C, D, other vitamins and minerals as well. Now, here it says we need to limit these nutrients. These are ones we want to take a look at. Now, with total fat, again, we'll look at in this class and see that not all fat's bad for us. We need fat in our diets. However, we do want to limit saturated fat and trans fat. We also want to limit certain types of cholesterol, and then sodium is also one that we need to take a look out for. Now, I find it interesting, it says to limit these nutrients. I would also argue that we want to take a look at sugars as well, especially added sugars. Obviously, sugars are a form of carbohydrate, and our body does utilize sugars, but it only utilizes them to a certain extent. After a while, those get stored up in our bodies, and then that's converted to fat. Anyway, so sugar, that's all to say, sugar is something you also probably want to take a look at as well. And then also we have our nutrients here. Again, this is an older food label, so we're not going to see vitamin A and C most likely on our food labels anymore. Instead, those are going to be replaced by potassium and vitamin D. I like this quick guide to percent daily value. Again, these figures aren't necessarily going to reflect your personal diet, but it does give us a ballpark as to how much a product has, or maybe it doesn't have enough of something. So for instance, 5% or less is low. In the case of macaroni and cheese, we see that vitamin C and vitamin A and iron, these are all considered low as far as the daily value you need in a day. All of that's to say is you better be supplementing with other foods that contain these nutrients, vitamin A, C, iron, because you're not going to get all of your needs just from this macaroni and cheese. As opposed to if we look at 20% or more being high in the case of food labels, we see here that macaroni and cheese in this case, it is a good source or significant source of calcium. But we can also see here that in 1 serving, keep in mind that's 1, not 2, We're at 20% daily value for sodium. If we eat the whole container, then that's going to be 40%, so almost half of your daily value for a day. So these are all things to keep in mind with your food label. These footnotes, I'm not seeing as much on food labels anymore, but essentially what these are is it takes some of these nutrients such as fat and carbohydrates, and it tells you how much a person needs on a 2,000 calorie diet. Okay, now we are going to take a look at a few practical or real life examples of food labels. So first, peanut butter, my favorite food. As we can see here, compared to that image I was just showing you, the serving size and the calories are significantly larger now compared to older food labels, so they're much more prominent. They also have bolded, which I don't know if it was like this in the other one, but they have bolded the main, the macronutrients that we want to take a look at. Sodium's not a macronutrient, but in cholesterol, but it's still something that we want to note on our food labels. I don't know if you can see on this one, but it has vitamin D and potassium listed. Food labels can also, manufacturers can also choose to add other nutrients that they want to highlight in their foods. So in this case, we see that vitamin E and niacin are also added to this particular food label, as opposed to thin wheat, the generic form of wheat thins. We just see the basic required nutrients that need to be listed. One interesting thing with this particular food label as well is that generally with serving sizes, we see it measured in cups or tablespoons, teaspoons, etc. In this case, it actually gives a count for how many actual crackers make up a serving size, which in this case, it's actually helpful because you don't have to know serving sizes necessarily or eyeball serving sizes. You can literally just count, so it makes it easier to determine how much you are eating. Another thing that wasn't included in that image that I showed a couple slides ago was the ingredients list. So with the ingredients, they're listed by weight. So we can say that the ones that are listed first, they make up the most of that particular food product. So in this case, we have whole grain wheat flour is listed first, followed by sugar, and then canola oil, etc. We can go down this list. You'll probably find it interesting as you're looking at food labels more, how many things are in our foods that maybe we can't even pronounce, or things that you don't think belong in food. It'll probably surprise you a bit. Okay, and then this is the last one I wanted to show. For some food products, particularly cereals, it's going to differentiate between calories just from the cereal itself and from the cereal once you add milk. In this case, it's skim milk, which maybe not all of you have skim milk, so this second column might not be the most accurate for you. However, it might be helpful for some of you to know, okay, what's the difference between me just eating the cereal and me eating with milk, which is probably how most of us eat our cereal anyway. All right, that is all I have for you as far as food labels. Please reach out to me via the Canvas inbox or even in the student discussion forum if you have any questions regarding food labels. This, again, will be really important when it comes to your dietary analysis assignments. So I just want to make sure that you all are on page and understand how to read a food label.